Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Jonathan had always been reserved with words but intense in his feelings. He was the kind of man who preferred to show affection through daily care, calm gestures, and constant presence. He'd been with Lauren for 9 years, and despite the ups and downs, he believed they had built something solid, something real. They shared a stable life, memorable trips, inside jokes, and a routine that seemed too comfortable to be risky. But as time went on, he began to realize that the solidity he cherished so much might have been hiding silent cracks, invisible to the naked eye. Their love, which once felt so alive, turned into long silences, cold conversations, and touch-free encounters. Jonathan used to wake up before Lauren, prepare coffee, warm her towel on the heater, and straighten her side of the bed for later. Small things, almost invisible, but done from the heart. At first, she'd smile, give him a quick kiss on the cheek, sometimes even leave little heartfelt notes. Over time, those gestures disappeared. The kiss turned into a brief glance. The smile got lost between a sip of coffee and a phone notification. The house, once filled with conversation, started to echo only everyday sounds: the blender in the morning, Lauren's hurried footsteps toward the door, the TV in the background while they ate in silence. And the most painful part was that the change wasn't violent, no big fights or doors slamming. It was like the quiet cold before the rain, barely noticeable, but relentless. By the time you feel it, you're already curled up, trying to figure out when the temperature dropped so much. Jonathan had always dreamed of having children. He imagined a child's laughter in the house, drawings taped to the fridge, a little bit of mess that would give meaning to his overly orderly days. Early on, Lauren said she wanted that too, that they just needed more time, or to finish a certain project, or postpone a trip. He understood. He gave her space. He waited. Every year, her "not right now" came with convincing explanations, and he, wanting to be a good partner, never argued. But on lonely nights, he lay awake wondering if the time he so generously gave her was really time he was stealing from himself. He started paying closer attention to how Lauren avoided certain topics, how she looked away whenever he mentioned the future, like time was something she wanted to handle bit by bit. She was taking new courses, had new commitments, always busy. Meanwhile, Jonathan tried to maintain a connection. He became more affectionate, planned small surprises, searched for places that might reignite something between them. One weekend, he took her to the same hotel where they spent their honeymoon, even ordered her favorite wine. Lauren smiled, thanked him, seemed engaged, but 2 days later, she was back to being absorbed in her own world, as if that moment had just been a pause in the usual distance. It felt like walking down a road where he took 1 step forward and she took 2 steps back. The worst part was that Lauren seemed not to notice. When he mentioned it, she'd say he was exaggerating, that everything was fine, that they were just busy. Jonathan started to doubt himself. Was he asking too much? Were his expectations unrealistic? But as hard as he tried to convince himself otherwise, something inside him kept yelling that this wasn't all in his head. It was absence. It was a chill. It was a kind of abandonment without screaming or leaving, an abandonment that stayed. Even so, he kept trying. He stayed kind, present, patient. But he began to feel like he was in a one-sided relationship, as if he alone was responsible for keeping it alive. He started to mentally record every affectionate gesture he made, waiting for a response, an echo, some proof that he wasn't alone in this. The problem was that every attempt to get closer followed the same pattern: a brief moment when Lauren responded, followed by an even bigger gap. Then came the most uncomfortable realization of all: whenever he showed any frustration or impatience, Lauren would respond with coldness, empty stares, and a silence that spoke volumes. She had learned to punish without words. There was no need for fights. She just had to withdraw affection, deny warmth. That was enough to make him feel guilty for something he couldn't even identify. He started wondering if he was still loved, or just tolerated. And if her love, which once seemed so spontaneous, now appeared only as a reward for him following the rules, as if there were some invisible contract. He began to sense that maybe the problem wasn't the absence of love, but the way it was being used. That was when the cold, the kind that announces a storm, finally settled in for good. Jonathan started looking at their relationship with different eyes. What he used to see as just phases or distractions now looked like a well-defined pattern, an emotional cycle in which he wasn't a partner but a piece in play. He felt that his gestures, however sincere, only brought any reaction from Lauren when it was convenient for her. It was like there was an emotional switch she flipped on when she wanted something and turned off when she was done. The reciprocity he longed for arrived on a strict schedule, rationed out, almost like payment for good behavior. He tried to push aside these suspicions, but the signs were everywhere. Whenever he showed affection, she'd smile and show interest for a few hours. But if he said one wrong word, got distracted, or showed sadness, she pulled away. It was like living under a system of merits. Her affection was a reward for his good performance. And that tore him up inside. He started realizing how his own behavior was being shaped by fear of rejection. He'd wake up thinking of ways to avoid Lauren's silent treatment. He chose words carefully, analyzed every move and glance. He began to mold himself almost unconsciously to please her, to earn her attention. But the more he tried, the emptier he felt. Love, which should have been a place of warmth, was becoming a place of masked tension. He was walking on an emotional minefield, never sure which step might set off the next invisible explosion. On some days, he tried to pull back. He avoided long talks, held back gestures of affection. It was a way of protecting himself. He no longer wanted his peace of mind tied to her mood swings. But that distance, which was really an instinct for self-preservation, was quickly interpreted by Lauren as him not caring. She would then confront him, accusing him of lacking dedication. That cut Jonathan deeply, because everything he did was out of effort. Yet no matter what he did, it never felt like enough. It was a constant confusion. When he gave more, he was pushed to give even more. When he pulled back, he was called selfish. There was no balance. Everything revolved around Lauren's expectations, and all he could do was adapt. He started asking if this was still love or just an emotional game that kept him in constant doubt, so he would keep on trying, and trying. One night in particular stayed clear in his mind. It was Lauren's birthday, and he had prepared everything with extreme care. He cooked her favorite meal, decorated the living room with old pictures of them, picked a song she used to listen to in their early years together. When she arrived, she smiled. She said it looked nice. They ate in silence, and then she locked herself in the bedroom to take a call. Jonathan stayed there, alone at the table, staring at his empty plate and trying to figure out what he might have done wrong. Hours later, she came out saying she was tired. No kiss, no hug, not even a thank you. Jonathan blew out the candles by himself. That small gesture, which might be nothing to someone else, weighed a ton on his heart. Because in that silence, he recognized the pattern, punishment disguised as fatigue. And still, the next day, he took her to her favorite cafe, just to see her smile again. This constant giving without receiving anything back slowly ate away at Jonathan. He felt he was giving up parts of himself to keep something going that had already hurt him many times. He started wondering if there was still room for his own dreams or if he had become just an extension of Lauren's will. She decided when she loved him, when she ignored him, when she wanted closeness, when she needed space, and he went along, trying to keep pace, trying to earn it. Over time, the fear of displeasing her was bigger than his desire to be happy. He realized he was at the mercy of her slightest expressions, as if his emotional well-being depended on a subtle change in her face or tone. He stopped sharing his joys because she didn't seem to care. He stopped sharing his sorrows because they were treated like overreactions. He gradually silenced himself, shrinking his presence to whatever space she allowed. Love became a lonely effort, and the pain of loving alone became the heaviest weight in his daily routine. Slowly, his admiration for Lauren turned into caution. He watched her with suspicion, observing her behavior less with passion and more with scrutiny. The woman he once saw as home now made him feel like a stranger in his own house. Yet for reasons he still didn't fully understand, he stayed. A part of him believed that maybe, if he tried one more time, she'd notice. That if he made one last effort, she'd remember who he was. But that hope was already starting to slip away. Quietly, Jonathan began collecting disappointments. He logged every absence, every harsh word, every time he was denied affection, like someone who files away proof of guilt they don't want to confront. He still didn't know what he would do with all of it, but something was changing. For the first time in years, he stopped believing it was all his fault. And as painful as it was, it felt like the start of something. That morning, everything seemed the same. The sky was still overcast, just as it had been for days, and the smell of freshly made coffee filled the kitchen. Jonathan woke up before the alarm, like he always did. He made the coffee the same way, with 2 sugars, just how Lauren liked it. He left her mug on the counter, next to the butter and whole wheat bread. He washed his face slowly, looked at himself in the mirror a few seconds longer than usual, and took a deep breath. This would be the last time he belonged to that house. No shouting, no fighting, no suitcase tossed in the hallway. He left with the same calm he'd been carrying for the last few months. He made the bed, paid the bills for the month, hung up the dry towel, and left an envelope on the dining table. Inside was a short handwritten note, "I'm leaving to find peace. It's not a getaway, it's a new beginning." Jonathan walked to his car feeling the strange heaviness of something that should feel like freedom but at that moment felt like mourning. He drove slowly along streets he knew by heart. He passed the market where they bought fruit on Sundays, the cafe where Lauren loved sitting by the window, and the little park where he once proposed to her. Every place seemed to whisper that something was ending. And it was. He moved to a smaller town, about 2 hours away. He rented a small loft with exposed brick walls, a balcony overlooking a bed of hydrangeas, and a silence that welcomed him without demanding anything in return. That same day, Lauren called. Her voice was cold, distant, as if they were talking about some impersonal matter. He explained he needed peace, that he no longer wanted to live on that emotional tightrope. On the other end, silence. Then she responded with the same indifference that had hurt him so many times before, "If that's what you want, okay." No request to meet, no attempt to understand, not even a conversation. Just a flat, okay, like signing a receipt. That alone, more than any speech, showed Jonathan that his absence weighed less than he'd thought. He went on with his life. He started playing guitar again, a habit he'd let slip away in the busyness of routine. He read books that had been piled up for years on his shelf. He woke to the sound of birds and fell asleep with the window open, letting the breeze in without fearing constant judgment. He began working in an antique store, something he'd always wanted but never managed to fit into life with Lauren. It was a place full of objects with hidden stories, clocks that once marked important moments, faded photographs, furniture bearing scars. Strangely, he felt more alive there, among relics, than he had in his last few years with Lauren. People treated him kindly, without demands, and that alone was revolutionary. For several days, there was no word from Lauren. No messages, no emails, no attempt to talk. He thought he would feel guilty for leaving that way, but in the end, her silence confirmed he'd made the right choice. Lauren had always been good at disappearing when there was nothing left to gain. Jonathan could only move on and rebuild himself. One day, while he was arranging some items in the shop, an unexpected call came. Lauren's name appeared on his screen, and his heart raced. He answered with hesitation, bracing for anything, an apology, an outburst, or a late burst of emotion. But the voice on the other end was cold and direct. "I'm pregnant." For a few seconds, time stopped. Jonathan felt like the air had been sucked out of him. He stood there motionless, phone to his ear, as if the words were still being processed by his entire body. A baby. Right now, after everything. He tried to stay calm. He asked if she and the baby were okay. Lauren's tone changed. It became sharper, loaded with defensiveness, like she was ready for criticism. I thought you'd want to know. Jonathan hesitated. The question burning in his throat had to come out, no matter how harsh it sounded. Am I the father? On the other end, the silence wasn't brief. It lasted long enough for his mind to race. When Lauren finally spoke, it wasn't calmly. She spoke with indignation. How can you even ask me that? But the way she was offended revealed more than her words. Jonathan knew that tone. He recognized the anger that always flared up when she was confronted with something she wanted to keep hidden. It set off alarm bells. It wasn't just about the pregnancy, but the way she used the news, as if she expected him to drop everything and run back, ready to rewrite the story he'd taken so long to leave. Even though he felt thrown off, Jonathan stayed firm. He politely suggested a prenatal DNA test. He explained it wasn't baseless doubt, but a need for certainty. He'd spent too much time in a reality shaped by Lauren's whims. Now he needed something concrete, something not subject to her mood. Lauren got angry. She said she didn't deserve that treatment, that he'd turned into a stranger, cold and calculating. Jonathan hung up with his chest on fire. Part of him still wanted to believe that the child might be a last chance for them, even if it arrived too late. But another part, the clearer-thinking one, suspected it was just a new way to control him, a fresh tie to pull him back into what he'd struggled so hard to escape. The time between the call and the test results felt like an emotional desert. Jonathan woke up anxious, running through every possibility, reliving old scenes, trying to recall dates and moments of silence. What if it were true? If the child were his, would he open himself up again to a story already so marked by disappointment? And if not, how would he cope with that final betrayal? During those weeks, every day he went to sit in the garden of his new place. He sat under a tree and looked at the sky, hoping the breeze held some answers. He'd done that before, but never with such a heavy heart. This time, more than just his past was at stake, it was what he would do with his future. The envelope arrived on a day with a light drizzle, the kind that starts before the sky fully darkens. Jonathan was at the shop, rearranging old cameras in a glass case, when the delivery person came in holding the correspondence wrapped in plastic. Seeing the clinic's name made Jonathan's stomach clench. He held the envelope for a few seconds before setting it down on the counter. He had to take 3 deep breaths before opening it, his fingers trembled. It felt heavier than it should have. The contents amounted to a few lines, but each word carried the weight of an entire past. He read it once. Then again. Finally, he set it down on the counter and took a seat. The test was clear, no genetic link consistent with the alleged paternity. The result didn't shock him as much as he'd expected. Part of him had known all along. What hit him was the merciless finality, leaving no room to spin or make excuses. For weeks, he had carried a quiet torment, weighing the possibility of a child who could change the course of his new life. But this piece of paper said otherwise, the cycle was truly over. His phone buzzed on the table. A message from Lauren, 2 words, "You happy?" No punctuation. It didn't feel like a real question, more like a provocation. Jonathan didn't reply. He took the paper, folded it carefully, went into the backyard of the shop, and dug a small hole among the hydrangeas. He buried that document like someone burying the last remnants of a crushed dream. He closed the hole, wiped his hands on an old rag from the storage area, and went back inside. Over the following days, the silence became even more meaningful. Jonathan walked through the town like he was living in another time, lighter but also more alone. People around started to recognize him. He smiled more, chatted with the customers, listened to stories he might not have bothered with before. Life, even with its knots, now felt like it was finally flowing with a calm he hadn't experienced in years. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.